Welcome to the Ray Hanania Radio Show, brought to you by the U.S. Arab Radio Network and sponsored by Arab News, the leading English language newspaper in the Middle East at arabnews.com. It's Thursday, October 10, 2024, and this is Season 4, Episode 9. This week, here on the Ray Hanania Radio Show, we address the year-long and escalating violence that has plagued the Middle East. Violence has always marked relations between Israel and the Palestinians and the region in the face of opposition to peace and solutions like the two-state solution, and also the role of the Western news media in covering and spinning the conflict. What impact does the media have? It's been a long conflict marked by explosions of violence, including the violence committed by Hamas on October 7, 2023, that took more than 1,200 Israeli lives, and the year-long violence by Israel in Gaza that has taken more than 54,000 lives, and that is expanding into Lebanon, where thousands more lives are being taken. But it didn't just start on October 7th, as Israel's government contends, and criticism of Israel's government is not anti-Semitic, and it's not just coming from Arab and non-Jewish community leaders. It is coming from the Jewish community too. With me today to discuss this ongoing tragedy are two individuals who will help us look at different issues of this growing crisis. First, Jeff Cohen. Jeff was founding director of the Park Center for Independent Media at Ithaca College, where he is an associate professor of journalism. He founded the media watch group FAIR in 1986 and co-founded the online activist group rootsaction.org in 2011. Cohen has produced a documentary a series of movies, including The Corporate Coup d'etat and All Governments Lie, Truth, Deception, and the Spirit of I.F. Stone. Next, we will have Dr. Zaher Sahloul, president and co-founder of Med Global, who is with us addressing the growing crisis for displaced people in Palestine, Lebanon, and the region. The number of refugees and medical needs have risen to crisis proportions, but more importantly and more frighteningly, he's noticed a larger increase in the killing of medical professionals, the destruction of hospitals, and that's added an aspect to this conflict that in his many years of helping refugees and displaced people, Dr. Sahloul says he has never seen before. The Ray Hanania Radio Show is broadcast live every Thursday at 5 p.m. on WNZK AM 690 Radio and rebroadcast on Monday at 5 p.m. on the U.S. Arab Radio Network in Michigan. It's also available online at arabnews.com/Ray Radio Show and also at facebook.com/Arab News. Get more information on me, Ray Hanania, at arabnews.com or on my personal website at www.hanania.com. We'll be right back with our guests right after these messages.
ArabNews.com, bringing you breaking news from across the Middle East and the latest on Arabs in America. Get inside the latest headlines with expert analysis and insights at ArabNews.com. Join over 5 million Facebook fans and over 10 million monthly readers. ArabNews.com, news that matters to you.
As the weather gets colder, it's a good idea to layer up with scarves, hats, and mittens. Another layer of protection this season is to get your flu and COVID-19 vaccines. You can get both vaccines at the same time. Talk to your healthcare provider or learn more at michigan.gov/COVID-flu-RSV and layer up for some added peace of mind. A message from the Michigan Department of Health and Human Services.
At Top Rehab Physical Therapy Clinic in Dearborn, we provide effective physical therapy sessions in order to limit pain and discomfort. Top Rehab provides physical therapy care for any diagnosis prescribed by a physician, and we regularly see and treat conditions such as stroke, TMJ, fibromyalgia, sciatica, joint pain, and more. We use a variety of pain management methods, including modalities, soft tissue mobilization, and therapeutic exercise. If you're in need of physical rehabilitation or physical physical therapy, get the highest quality health care at Top Rehab. Most insurance is accepted and we're open Monday, Wednesday, and Friday 8 to 6, Tuesday and Thursday 8 to 5, and Saturday 10 till 2. Call for an appointment today at 313-846-0555. That's 313-846-0555. Choose Top Rehab Physical Therapy Clinic on Michigan Avenue in Dearborn. Life's too short to be in pain.
And now, as we continue our discussion about the crisis in the Middle East, Gaza, Israel, Lebanon, the violence, the carnage is just horrible. There's not enough focus on the people who are surviving, people that have lost their homes. And I felt one of the most important people to talk to about what is being faced and what's happening is my guest, Zaher Sahloul, who's president and founder of Med Global, who's with us addressing the growing crisis for displaced people in Palestine, in Lebanon, and the region. The number of refugees and medical needs have risen to crisis proportions. Dr. Sahloul, thank you so much for joining us. I know your organization does so much, not just to help refugees find a cohesive existence, but providing the biggest thing they need, medical services to keep their families healthy. What's happening in the region and how is it impacting an already greater refugee crisis that you've been dealing with for years?
Thank you, Ray, for having me and for shedding the light on this crisis. So this year, 2024, we have a record number of displaced people in the world. According to United Nations, UNHCR, which is the refugee agency of the United Nations, we have 125 million refugees in the whole world. In our region, in MENA region, we represent probably 25% of those. The estimates in the beginning of the year that this MENA regions mean Middle East and North Africa, including Syria, Palestine, Lebanon, Sudan, will have about 12 million displaced people. But I think right now we exceeded triple this number because, wow. Yes, I mean, if you look at Sudan itself, I mean, we don't talk about Sudan that much. It's, of course, a huge country with a lot of natural resources. Unfortunately, because of the war in Sudan, we have about 12 million people who are displaced inside Sudan and at least 3 million refugees between Egypt and Chad and South Sudan and neighboring countries. So this is only one country. Of course, all of us are paying attention to what's happening in Gaza, in Palestine, in Lebanon now, with the war in Lebanon, with the Israeli war in Lebanon, and of course, the neighboring countries. Let's not forget Syria. There's still 1 out of 4 refugees in the world are still from Syria. 6.5 million refugees are from Syria. Half of the Syrian population are displaced because of the last 13 years of war. So because of Gaza by itself created a huge displacement. So Gaza has a population of 2.3 million people. 95% of them have been displaced, not 1 time, not 2 times, not 3 times, 5 or 6 times. In the last couple of days, the IDF, the Israeli army, asked northern Gaza, people who are living in northern Gaza, Beit Lahia, Jabalia, these areas, Beit Hanun, which has about 500,000 people who've been displaced multiple times, to evacuate again. And they ordered 3 hospitals that we support, Al Auda Hospital, Indonesian Hospital, and Kamal Udwan Hospital, to evacuate their patients. So that means these hospitals that are treating the local communities around them will not have doctors or nurses to treat the patients who are injured, which is against international humanitarian law. And what we've seen in the previous crises, that when hospitals are bombed and doctors are targeted, people leave. So when we talk about these astronomical numbers of refugees and displaced people in the Middle East, and we ask about what's happening there, it's of course the bombs and the missiles and the fact that hospitals and humanitarians and ambulances are targeted. In Lebanon, in the last couple of weeks, we have about 1.2 million people who are displaced inside Lebanon. About 400,000 people went to Syria, which already has a refugee crisis of itself. And the Syrian refugees who were in Lebanon, 1.5 million of them, are suffering similar to the Palestinian refugees in Lebanon, similar to, of course, the Lebanese people, the host communities. And they are also themselves now being displaced to either Syria or inside Lebanon. So we're talking about displacement over displacements, layer of displacement. And of course, if you are in the Middle East, you are born and raised on the original refugee crisis in 1948, which we are still suffering from. So this problem, the current crisis of displacement and refugees, will cause huge harm not only to the region, because you have now people and children who are born in refugee camps will not have proper education, will not have proper health care. You have of course, all the social ills that happens because of the being refugees, lack of resources, lack of hope, lack of jobs, and lack of future, and that's going to create huge problem in the areas and also refugee crisis to Europe. Because when people and especially young people don't feel that their country or their homeland is able to provide them, and they see on social media that other people are living happily and they have resources and so forth, they will leave and they will
It,
take risk and they will drown, as we are seeing now
it
what's happening.
creates a shift of populations. And I just want to emphasize to our listeners, when we talk about refugees and displaced people, it's really two different groups of people. Refugees were originally displaced but never allowed to return. There's a belief that these displaced people, this huge number of displaced people, in a sense, they are temporary refugees, aren't they? And they hope to go back to where they're originally from, correct?
Yeah, well, I mean, the difference between this place is the bigger term, and it means any person who leaves their home or village or neighborhood because they are afraid
Right.
of war or because of natural disaster. Refugees are the people who leave their country to other countries. So in Syria, for example, half of the population are displaced inside Syria, internally displaced people, IDPs, and 6.5 million people are refugees. They are
Wow.
displaced out of the countries.
Wow. And and your main focus has been to provide medical assistance to these people all over the Middle East, throughout the region over there. When you look at the intensity of the trauma that you have to deal with today, is it similar? Is it worse? Is it not as bad? I mean, it's hard for me to believe that it's not probably the worst situation we've ever seen, but how do you characterize what you're seeing among the displaced and the refugees who are impacted by this crisis?
I'm not a mental health specialist, but I've studied this. And because we're dealing with wars and impact of war on health and displacement, every person who is displaced has mental health trauma. And this mental health trauma is manifestate itself as depression, anxiety, phobias, PTSD, which is the most extreme, and future physical problems, hypertension, diabetes, obesity, all of these things. And also, let's not forget that displacement by itself will lead people to have negative adapting mechanism. So we just released a report about the impact of war on Syria on drug addiction. So people who are in Syria and probably in Lebanon and Gaza, so they will flee from the reality that they are living to different realities. So they use drugs. So there is an epidemic in Syria of Captagon, a stimulant, of crystalline meth, of painkillers that is leading also destroying the society from the inside. And we are seeing the same thing pattern in Lebanon and other places. So mental health issues is generational mental health. There are some studies that showed actually it affects your DNA if you are displaced and if you have mental health trauma because of wars. So that means generation will inherit the mental health trauma from generation. And this is what's happening in the Middle East. Children are traumatized from the time they are born in a displacement or refugee camp.
Do you see the an increase in the trauma among women and children as a result of this conflict, or is this typical? In other words, is it what we're seeing in Gaza and Lebanon? Is this a typical conflict involving refugees and displaced people, or is this at a new level? Is it different?
It is different because everyone is displaced in Gaza. Everyone has been displaced multiple times. And it's not only you have bombs destroying certain places, but it is destroying the livelihood, the infrastructure, civilian infrastructures, schools, universities, churches, mosques, killing leaders of the community, displacing people, making Gaza unlivable. That means people will have always uncertainty of even if the war stopped right now. What will happen to me and to my family in the future? So this level of uncertainty we have not seen before. Before there is always hope. And right now in Gaza, there's no hope. The same thing we're seeing in Lebanon. There's no hope. There are no countries that are opening their arms and doors to the people in Lebanon and Gaza and telling them, we will protect you and will provide you with shelter, with food, with medicine and healthcare and education. This is not happening in the Middle East, despite the fact that we have countries that are really quite wealthy, as we know, in the Middle East. And they are able to absorb refugees and provide them with everything. But we have inequities in the Middle East, and this is creating more problems. Of course, the most vulnerable, as you have mentioned, are children, the women, the elderly, and people with disabilities, and they are suffering more than anything. Imagine yourself, a pregnant woman in a tent in Gaza, moving from place to place and don't have access to healthcare and bleeding and having complications with pregnancy and does not have a place for birth. This is happening on a daily basis. The same thing with someone who's elderly, who is on dialysis, or someone who has cancer and need chemotherapy. You have suffering that I cannot imagine. Words is not enough to describe what's the situation.
And there's also this other horrific level above all this where the doctors have been the victims. How many doctors have we seen lost in this period of conflict? And is it higher than what we normally see? It almost, you get the sense that doctors and even journalists and some professionals are being targeted. Do you feel the doctors are being targeted in these two conflicts? I mean, how do you feel about that?
I mean, definitely. I mean, there are new norms, if we can call it that way, that are being now created, especially in Gaza and now in Lebanon. And we've seen that in Syria, by the way, and a little bit in Ukraine, where you have hospitals, doctors, and ambulances targeted intentionally to cause displacement and deprive the communities from healthcare. In Gaza, more than 600 medics, that mean doctors, nurses, and first responders have been killed so far, according to United Nations. In Lebanon, I was reading the numbers this morning. 39 hospitals have been bombed in Lebanon, and 97 medics have been killed in the last 2 weeks. So these numbers you did not see before in previous conflicts, and it looks like it's becoming the norms. And this is, of course, against Geneva Convention, against medical neutrality, against international humanitarian law, and there is no accountability. When there's no accountability, murderers tend to repeat the crime.
Yeah, that's a scary part of all this, that that we're seeing a widening of the conflict. It isn't just to move people out. It isn't just to get at terrorists. It seems like it doesn't matter. Whoever gets killed, whether they're doctors, whether they're journalists. And as you lose doctors and medical support, that pushes the population away, doesn't it, even more?
Definitely. You know, I spoke with people in Syria and in Gaza about the bombs, and people are quite resilient in the Middle East and other places, but especially in our areas, because there are a lot of unfortunately wars and disasters. And they tell you, okay, well, I can tolerate the bombs and the missiles, and if it hit me, if it will hit me. But if there's no doctors in town, that when my kid have fever or abdominal pain, I cannot take them to a doctor or to a nurse, I will leave. So, I think these attacks on healthcare in Gaza and Lebanon are not just collateral damage. They are intentional. And they are causing more harm and, of course, displacement of the population. And they are against international humanitarian law.
And just to summarize, this crisis that we're seeing has tripled, you said, the number of displaced and refugee populations. And I know some people are going to, there is a difference between displaced and refugees, but I'm thinking the life of a displaced person and the life of the refugee in that moment has to be exactly the same. Uncertainty, fear, death, and not knowing where you're going to be. This is terrible. Just a few final thoughts. Where do you think this is headed? Can this get worse? Does it look like it's heading to a worse level? Or do you see any signs that it might be easing? Yeah. If we can talk about trauma as using a word like easing.
Yeah, every time we say it's this is the bottom of the crisis, and it get worse in the Middle East for some reason. I mean, who imagined that the war that is happening right now in Lebanon will happen. This morning, there were 650,000 displaced people in 900 shelters. And thousands of people are staying in the streets because there's no enough shelters to accommodate them in Lebanon, which is a small country with very delicate demographic balances, as you know. So I hope that at one point this will stop. But geopolitics play a major role in this, as you know, Ray. So we have elections where our administration is distracted. Netanyahu in Israel is feeling that this is his chance to finish the job, which I don't know what would be that job. Lebanon is now the focus of the crisis, of course, Gaza, but also Iran may be the next. And if this happen and Iran become the next field of war, then I think the whole region will explode.
Do you feel that one final question, do you feel that the word has gotten out properly through the media? Has the media done a good job? When you talk about 600 medical professionals that have been killed in this crisis, that's huge. I mean, it seems to me like that's way beyond the norm, as you pointed out. That's not normal.
It is not normal. And imagine how long it'll take to get a doctor, become a physician. It takes 30 years of education and then specialization. And we're talking about the best doctors in Gaza. If you remove a surgeon or a head of department in Gaza or in Lebanon, it's very difficult to replace them. It takes years and generations to replace these doctors. And if you bomb their hospitals and university, that means this will set healthcare in Gaza and other places, way, way back. The media, of course, is not giving justice to this. There are bits and pieces, especially at the beginning of the war in Gaza. But after that, I think the media, for some reason, turn away from what's going on in Gaza. It is inhumane. It is immoral. It's unethical to ignore this. But for some reason, the media is not paying attention.
Well, my guest, Dr. Zaher Sahloul, I really admire you because you're not a politician. You're not arguing. You're not a fighter. You're there trying to help people that are in need. Every doctor like you walk into a dangerous zone and try to save lives. I don't know of any profession that would do more and be more brave to do that. So I hope people appreciate everything that is being done. My guest is Dr. Zaher Sahloul, president and founder of Med Global, who is helping us to understand the growing crisis for displaced and refugee people in the Palestine-Lebanon region in this conflict. The numbers have increased dramatically, just to new levels that we've never seen. If you want to get more information on Med Global, you can go to medglobal.org. Dr. Sahloul, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Ray.
We're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we will continue the Ray Hanania Radio Show here at the U.S. Arab Radio Network, sponsored by Arab News. I'm Ray Hanania. We'll be right back right after these messages.
ArabNews.com, bringing you breaking news from across the Middle East and the latest on Arabs in America. Get inside the latest headlines with expert analysis and insights at ArabNews.com. Join over 5 million Facebook fans and over 10 million monthly readers. ArabNews.com, news that matters to you.
With more than 30,000 successful in vitro fertilizations, IVF Michigan is now ranked as one of America's best fertility clinics according to Newsweek magazine. IVF Michigan fertility centers are the recognized leaders in high-quality fertility care. With locations in Bloomfield Hills and 9 other cities in Michigan and Ohio, IVF has experts in all aspects of the field. A founding member, American board-certified Dr. Nicholas Shama, is one of the leading reproductive endocrinologists in Michigan and Ohio. He has performed over 20,000 successful IVF cases, and it's helped thousands of couples fulfill their dreams of parenthood. When it's time to get personalized care from Dr. Nicholas Shama at one of America's best fertility clinics, call IVF Michigan Fertility Centers in Michigan and Ohio toll-free at 855-952-9600. 855-952-9600.
بين الأنقاض وركام الأبنية داخل خيمة شيدت على عجل بجانب سرير في مشفى ميداني. كانت منظمة الحياة للإغاثة والتنمية من أول الواصلين لمساعدة ضحايا زلزال تركيا وسوريا، وفي الذكرى 30 على تأسيسها ما زالت تساعد ضحايا الزلزال والمتضررين من الكوارث الطبيعية في 36 بلداً حول العالم دون تمييز بين عرق أو جنس أو دين، ودون اقتطاع أي رسوم إدارية على تبرعات الاستجابة الطارئة. تبرع الآن لتبث الأمل في حياة كثير من المتضررين والمحتاجين من خلال منظمة الحياة للإغاثة والتنمية التي تم اختيارها من أفضل 9 مؤسسات خيرية حول العالم لعام 2022. تبرعوا الآن على الرقم 1-800-827-3543 أو زوروا موقعهم الإلكتروني لمزيد من المعلومات على www.lifeusa.org. Life for Relief and Development. حيثما توجد الحياة يوجد الأمل.
Hey Michigan, let's think beyond the sink and learn where the water your family drinks every day comes from. Private wells and public water supplies allow homes across Michigan to draw water from different sources like lakes, rivers, and groundwater. Tap into the facts about your home's water source and learn about your home's water quality to protect your family's health. Visit michigan.gov/care for MI drinking water. A message from the Michigan Department of Health and Human Services.
And welcome back. Again, this is Ray Hanania here with the Ray Hanania Radio Show on WNZK AM 690 Radio in Michigan and on the U.S. Arab Radio Network across the country. I got a great guest, somebody that I've known for a long time, but it wasn't until I read his bio that I said, wow, this is a guy that I admire. He was just a guest when I reached out to him, but now he's not just a guest. He's somebody that I really have a lot of respect for. Jeff Cohen, he's the founding director of the Park Center for Independent Media at Ithaca College, where he's a professor, an associate professor of journalism. He founded the Media Watch group, FAIR, in 1986 and co-founded the online activist group rootsaction.org in 2011. He co-produced documentary movies, including The Corporate Coup d'etat and All Governments Lie, Truth, Deception, and the Spirit of I.F. Stone. He's the author of Cable News Confidential, My Misadventures in Corporate Media, which I got to go back and reread now because I'm talking to him. And he was a commentator at CNN, Fox News, MSNBC, and the senior producer at MSNBC's Phil Donahue Primetime Show. What a resume. You know, Jeff, thank you for joining the show.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Well, it's always sad with all the experience that we both have that we have to delve into this horrific conflict that's taking place in the Middle East. I hate to use the word start, but October 7th kind of put this on the map, but with the murders of almost some 1,200 Israelis by Hamas militants. And then it just exploded from there. But this conflict has been going on forever. For years before that, it'll probably go on for years after. But from your perspective, tell me, when you look at this conflict and how it's evolved, what do you see and how do you explain it to the public?
It's hard to explain because there's so much propaganda from all sides. I don't think it's as complex as people say. I appreciate the work of this writer, Ta-Nehisi Coates, who has a new book out called The Message. And it was based on his trip to the West Bank. And I visited the West Bank, the occupied territory, about 11 years ago. I think it's a story of Jews were an oppressed people. They were massacred in Europe by Europeans, Christian Europeans. You look at the long history, I'm Jewish, you look at the long history of Jewish people. Actually, Jews have been better treated by Muslims and Arabs than they were by Christians and Europeans in the long view. But on the basis of the Holocaust, the Nazi Holocaust against the Jews, I think a lot of the current leadership of the Israeli state have learned all the wrong lessons. They've learned the lesson that we better kill them before they kill us. The Palestinians had nothing to do with the Nazi Holocaust. They've been displaced by Israelis more and more, year after year, decade after decade. So I see Israel as a state that practices apartheid against the Palestinian Arabs. I witnessed it. Everyone knows it. Human Rights Watch says it. Amnesty International says it. The Israeli human rights group, the great group B'Tselem, says it. It's an apartheid state. So, when I hear the right wing of Israel, like Netanyahu, we're going to destroy Hamas, and they kill tens of thousands of civilians. Let's assume they could destroy Hamas. I don't think they can, but let's assume they could. Some new group, perhaps even more militant, is going to, of course, sprout up because of the oppression that Palestinians face in Gaza and also in the West Bank and also in East Jerusalem. So, we should have learned in our country after 9/11, you kill a bunch of civilians, you kill people that had nothing to do with 9/11, you're going to create more terrorists than you can kill. And the Israeli state, I think, is out of control. It's never been more right-wing. It's never been more racist. It's a sad situation. I just watched excerpts from Al Jazeera's new documentary about Israeli war crimes in Gaza. It's bone-chilling.
Yeah.
And, my main message as someone who worked in mainstream media and taught journalism at college is we have to, as journalists, understand that all lives matter.
Yeah.
That Palestinian lives are as important as Israeli lives. You don't get that from the U.S. news media. You get it in a lot of other countries that all lives matter, including Palestinians. In our country, it's just Israeli lives, Israeli suffering, Israeli deaths, Israeli hostages. There's far more Palestinian detainees who are in many ways hostages. They aren't charged, they're tortured, they're abused. There's thousands and thousands of them, including children. So I know, Ray, you agree with this. I wish there was more even-handedness. I wish there was more empathy for people on all sides of this conflict. But in the U.S. media, and it's probably the most biased, maybe even counting Israel, the U.S. media is so biased against Palestinians and so believing of so many of the distortions, exaggerations, propaganda that comes from Israel. It's really sad.
Do you think it's the non-empathetic, partisan approach to the Middle East from this country that empowers the far right in Israel to get away with what it gets away with? Because I think a lot of Arabs that I know and Jews that I know would agree that both sides have suffered. They're extremists on both sides, but for some reason, only one side seems to be showcased, especially here in the United States.
Yeah, I agree with everything you just said. It's this one-sidedness that empowers the right wing in Israel. We're not arming Hamas. We're not arming Iran. We arm Israel. And no matter what they do with those weapons, in violation of U.S. law, they just keep getting more weapons and more ammunition and more bombs to kill innocent civilians. We have to stop arming Israel as a country, the United States. And there needs to be a solution from the Palestinian leadership and the Israeli leadership, and there has to be equality of both sides. And that's not what we're moving toward. We're moving away from it. The more you empower the Israeli right wing by giving them more weapons, it's not the solution, it's the problem. And we know what the solution is. The solution is the U.S. quits giving diplomatic cover to Israel, quits arming it. It's in violation of U.S. law, the Leahy Amendment. You can't use U.S. weapons to kill civilians. It's a violation of State Department rules that when a government is preventing aid from getting to civilians in a war zone, That's illegal and you have to shut off the weapons. Tony Blinken was told this by his top people, that Israel is in fact preventing aid to get to civilians, humanitarian aid to get to civilians. He was told that. He went to the Congress and he did not tell the truth. So there's so many international and U.S. laws that are being violated as the U.S. just keeps funneling weapons. And I fear one of the most anti-Muslim, anti-Arab, I would say anti-Semitic leaders in U.S. history, Donald Trump, may win the election because so many progressive people, young people, Arabs, Arab Americans, Muslim Americans, they can't bring themselves to vote for Kamala Harris because she's Biden's vice president and has not separated herself at all from Biden's policy, which I consider horrific with regard to Israel, Palestine. So you have a bunch of people that are either stay home on election day or they're going to vote third party. And especially a state like Michigan, which is where I grew up. I grew up in Detroit. I had a lot of Arab American friends. And as I say, I grew up Jewish American. I feel sick that Trump, who's so anti-Muslim, the Muslim ban, he may win because people of goodwill just can't bring themselves to vote for Harris. Now, I don't want to advise people what to do, but if I was still living in Michigan, and you've just heard what I believe has been horrible Biden-Harris policy, I'd still get out there and vote against Trump.
Yeah, it's the emotions have clouded everything. When you see so many people getting killed, first 1,200 Israelis getting killed on October 7th, that's horrific. And then 50,000 more Palestinians. And then you see how the media marginalizes the reports on Palestinians killed into a statistic and a number, and personalizes the injuries and the killing of Israelis. That media, to me, sounds like, and I've been a journalist, as you know, for 45 years, from Chicago City Hall all the way to the Middle East. It seems like the news media in America is actually not just pushing one political side, but they're also creating a cover for Israel to do what it is doing. Israel's government, I should say.
Yeah, I agree with you 100% that you get coverage of Israelis who are hostages, their family. We learn about their background. You don't hear that about the Palestinians. They've got families too. They've got loved ones. They've got aspirations and hopes. Even Gaza, which was so oppressed prior to October of last year. I've seen great documentaries about the life going on in Gaza and the people going to college and the people trying to help their fellow Gazans. I mean, it's been almost pulverized. It's now almost rubble. But you're right. It's one side gets humanized and the other side is a statistic. And, there's humans on both sides. Arabs have contributed so much to our country and so much to the world. And yet in our media, it's almost like Arab Americans, but especially Palestinian Americans, don't matter and their lives don't matter. I was part of Black Lives Matter. I marched with my daughters for Black Lives Matter. I'm obviously not Black. But we really need to say Palestinian lives matter.
And I know that part of the problem could be, I think, the Arab and Palestinian leadership itself. I mean, we come from centuries of where the focus isn't on free speech and communications. Where when I became a journalist in the 1970s, it was almost an embarrassment to my parents. And my uncles and cousins who were all doctors and engineers. Why would you become a journalist? We had that attitude against journalism And I think we also had an attitude against leadership accountability. It doesn't seem like the Palestinians have good leaders to confront the Israelis. I mean, there are a lot of imbalances, correct? A leadership imbalance, a media imbalance, organizational imbalance, a society imbalance. How do we get out of this? Because it's not getting better. It seems like it's getting worse. How do we get out of this, and where are we headed?
Yeah, I've got to say that I left the West Bank 11 years ago somewhat surprisingly positive toward so many of the leaders in villages and communities that I met. These were people that were not that big on the Palestinian Authority. Yeah, they certainly weren't Hamas. They were trying to use nonviolent action to protect their communities. And these are the leaders that Israel prevents from becoming leaders. They're thrown in jail. Their kids throw a rock, at soldiers occupying their villages and taking their water, and the parents get taken to jail along with the child. I met these people. That great documentary, Five Broken Cameras,
right?
That was nominated for an Oscar. Everyone should watch it if they have not. I met those people. These are the people that could be leading a Palestinian state and leading the Palestinian community into the future. We know Israel helped build Hamas at the beginning because they wanted a counterweight to the PLO. That was completely stupid. That set back the region years. And they've undermined any authority of the Palestinian Authority. And these leaders who really do have roots among the Palestinian communities that I met, brave, nonviolent leaders. They knew I was Jewish. They accepted me into their homes. Israel prevents that leadership from taking power. So, we know there's a solution. And it just, I see the main obstacle is the Israeli right-wing regime, supported uncritically by the United States and European countries, the same colonialists that created so many problems in Asia, Africa, Latin America. I can't believe how many of them are standing with Israel. The people aren't.
Right.
Like, you talk to the average Irish person on the street or French person on the street, they're appalled by what Israel is getting away with, but their governments are sort of apologizing for it and enabling it, especially the German government, the British government, and my own government, the US government. But there is a solution. We know there are people of goodwill, a few of them still left in Israel. A lot of the best people have moved out of Israel. They can't stand what Israel has become. That some of them are my neighbors here in upstate New York because they couldn't handle the racism and violence of the current Israeli society. But there are still good people on both sides, and we could have a peace. And I don't believe the United States government is facilitating it. We're just facilitating more oppression, more occupation, and more guns to Israel.
Has that Lee Act ever been applied? Where someone was sanctioned, where we've given them weapons? I don't recall if we've ever punished anybody for violating that.
No, but it's been discussed a lot. Bernie Sanders keeps bringing it up.
Right.
Now, Senator Leahy's from Vermont. Bernie was a senator from Vermont. They were once senators together.
That makes
Leahy's
sense.
Retired. He says, of course, Israel, the U.S. is violating the Leahy law. Those weapons should be shut off.
Yeah.
I credit Bernie Sanders for fighting to try to stop the weapons flow. And again, as you know, Bernie's Jewish.
I was going to say it's ironic that the strongest voices against what the government of Israel is doing are Jewish.
Yeah.
Jill Stein, who is with the Green Party, is probably the loudest voice in politics against it. and yet she's been suppressed.
Yeah.
Bernie Sanders, Jewish senator, speaking out against it. You know, the Israeli attitude and they bragging about how we've killed the leadership of Hezbollah, we've killed the leadership of Hamas, but that isn't going to kill the problem, is it? That just creates a worse problem, doesn't it? Just
no doubt. No doubt. I mean, remember the 1982 invasion of Lebanon, which was so awful, birthed Hezbollah. There will always be groups. If people are oppressed, there will be groups within that oppressed community that turn to violence, and they may get more and more extreme as Israel kills more and more civilians. But I want to mention Jewish Voice for Peace.
Yes, absolutely. Another great organization.
Yeah, my daughter works in that group. She's an activist. My wife, her mom and I are so proud of her. There's another Jewish group, If Not Now. There are a bunch of rabbis, including in Chicago and Detroit, who are supporters of Palestinian rights. You can be Jewish and a critic of Israel or a critic of the Zionist idea. And there's many of us that are. My mentor was Noam Chomsky.
Right.
Who was one of the leading intellectuals, is one of the leading intellectuals in the world. And he's always been an ally of Palestinians. And he was raised, his first language was Hebrew. His parents were Hebrew teachers in Philadelphia. And he's a great friend of the Palestinian people. And he's Jewish. So it's not like a Jewish.
Do you think that this will come? Do you think this will come to roost for Netanyahu?
I hope so.
If the emotions were to come down and people were voices, it's hard to speak out now because of the enormous amount of violence. But at some point, that's going to happen. I think you made a great point that after the 1982 Lebanese war, Hezbollah rose up. And that was, they invaded Lebanon before Hezbollah existed because there was another terrorist movement, alleged quote unquote terrorist movement. And what did it do? It created a new terrorist movement. Is this a pattern that we can expect to see, do you think, in the future?
That's the sad thing. Israel's strategy is doomed to failure. You can't just keep massacring so many civilians to get a few armed groups and think we're going to destroy that group. They're bragging how they're destroying Hezbollah. If they do, some new group is going to rise up because they've now killed thousands of Lebanese civilians. You can't bomb your way to peace. You can't bomb your way to a negotiated solution. That can only be done when you stop the bombing and give up land that they seized from the Palestinians and make peace. And Netanyahu's unwilling to do it. He's a little bit like Trump. He's Israel's Trump. He's afraid if he stops the war, stops the violence, he may go to jail. Netanyahu, he's corrupt.
Right. He's been indicted with 3 charges of corruption.
Oh,
but
yeah.
What you said is kind of an indictment of his strategy that he's really not after peace, is he? Because
Right.
peace is not a circumstance that's good for him.
Oh, no. Perpetual war is good for him. And there's other forces in Israel where they just keep the violence. It's become a warfare state. But I mean, you're a journalist. I'm a journalist. There's one of the leading newspapers in Israel. Much of the Israeli media is just propaganda.
Right.
But they have this newspaper, Haaretz.
Right.
With these a columnist named Gideon Levy.
Yes, great people.
He's like, there's certain heroic Israelis. They're very few, unfortunately, a shrinking minority. But Gideon Levy has been an ally of the Palestinian cause for years and years and years. And he writes for a very well-read paper. But you have right-wing Jews in this country who create right-wing media in Israel, which is, more popular, has more readers, more viewers than Haaretz, which is actually a quality newspaper that gives voice to Palestinian aspirations, but it's shrinking in terms of its power as right-wing media in Israel grows.
we're not at a junction, are we? Because what I see is that perpetuating the violence is what's going to keep Netanyahu in power, which means that once he achieves the destruction of Lebanon, he's going to have to expand that conflict to other areas in order to prevent what's left in Gaza, the West Bank, and Lebanon to regroup and reorganize. I mean, we're at a precipice, aren't we? Where things could get worse.
It's dangerous. I mean, his main goal has been to drag the United States into war with Iran, and he's very close to succeeding. This idea that Iran is the main cause of every problem. Again, if there wasn't Hamas supported by Iran, there might be some other group.
Right.
We have to understand, and any historian of Israel knows, there were Israeli terrorists before the state of Israel trying to bring a state into existence, and they bombed the King David Hotel. They killed civilians. They killed British civilians. If you're an oppressed group and you're a stateless group, there will be people within your community turning to violence. The only way to prevent that is peace and justice for all sides. And I think most Arab Americans, more Arab Americans are descendants of Lebanon. Their ancestry goes to Lebanon,
the largest
any
group.
Country in the Middle East. And Israel has repeatedly destroyed huge swaths of Lebanon time after time. It just sickens me. It just sickens me. I'm someone who tries to love all humanity. It's hard for me to love people like Trump and people like Netanyahu, who are just haters. But I just feel sick for what's happened to Lebanon now. And Gaza is pulverized.
When I talk to,
while all the attention is on Gaza and Lebanon, what they're doing in the West Bank is just horrific. What the settlers, supported by the Israeli soldiers, I mean, we've got to wind it back, and it saddens me. You're there in Chicago. The Democrats wouldn't even allow a Palestinian American member, elected official, to speak to the Democratic Convention. Again, I'm really worried that people of goodwill, people who want peace and justice in the Middle East, I'm worried that in Michigan and other places, they're going to stay home or vote or cast a third-party protest vote. If I lived in a swing state like Michigan, I'd vote against Trump by voting Democratic. I live in New York. I'll cast a protest vote. I don't
because it won't matter.
Yeah, the Democrats
Right,
are going to win here Harris is going to beat Trump by 15 or more points.
Right.
So I'm going to cast a vote. But as I say, in my home state of Michigan or any of these other close battleground states, I would just, for that 10 seconds of my life, I'd cast the vote to defeat Trump by voting Democratic, despite all of the criticism you've heard me make of the Democratic leadership, including Harris. And the group that I co-founded, rootsaction.org, we've been fighting for the lives of Palestinians all year and previous years. And so we're not exactly Democratic Party flacks. But if Trump comes to power again, the ability of groups like Jewish Voice for Peace or the groups that work for Arab-Jewish dialogue, we may not have the right to organize anymore. We may lose our free speech rights. That's what worries me, that if Trump comes to power, we won't have the right to protest within a year or two. And groups like Roots Action may be put out of business. And you're a journalist, I'm a journalist. Trump hates journalism.
I think the most important message that I'm hearing from you is that Arab Americans can't give up the Jewish community and believe that they've been sucked into this movement of violence. That once things calm, the majority of American Jews will stand up to do what's right, and it will be to respect both sides.
And remember, Jewish Americans under the age of 35 or 40, they're the ones that are with Jewish Voice for Peace and If Not Now, and in all of the polls of the Jewish American community. They're the ones who actually respect Palestinian rights as younger Jewish people, as well as some old timers, gray hairs like me. But the Jewish American community really respects Palestinian lives and wants peace and justice, doesn't want perpetual war.
All right. My guest, Jeff Cohen, founding director of Park Center for Independent Media at Ithaca College, where he's an associate professor of journalism, founder of the Media Watch Group FAIR in 1986, co-founder of the online activist group rootsaction.org in 2011. His website is jeffcohen.org. Jeff, it's always a pleasure to talk to you. Thank you for joining us on radio.
Thank you, Ray.
We're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we will continue the Ray Hanania Radio Show here at the U.S. Arab Radio Network, sponsored by Arab News. I'm Ray Hanania. We'll be right back right after these messages.
ArabNews.com, bringing you breaking news from across the Middle East and the latest on Arabs in America. Get inside the latest headlines with expert analysis and insights at ArabNews.com. Join over 5 million Facebook fans and over 10 million monthly readers. ArabNews.com, news that matters to you.
Are you going to start a restaurant or a grocery store soon? Do you need floor plans and designs? Call Naji Abood at 734-744-9796. Do you want to buy kitchen and restaurant equipment at discount prices? Call Naji Abood now, 734-744-9796. New Concept Products and Design, the trademark of kitchen equipment. 5% discount on all purchases of $75,000 or more. New Concept Products and Design, new location, 31185 Schoolcraft in Livonia. Learn more at www.newconceptproducts.com. Call Naji Abood, 734-744-9796.
Get ready for an amazing experience at Ishtar Restaurant on 15 Mile Road in Sterling Heights. Enjoy excellent hospitality from owners Ali Al-Baghdadi and Fatty Bottom, serving the best in Mediterranean food. Try Chef Ali Al-Baghdadi's famous shawarma, the best Iraqi grills and food, and the best Arabic and international dishes. Dine in our authentic atmosphere or take out. Call 586-698-2585 or check us out on Facebook. Ishtar Restaurant practices all CDC guidelines and is open every day 11 a.m. to 10 p.m. Have an amazing experience today at Ishtar Restaurant, 3625 15 Mile Road, Sterling Heights.
Ziyad brand. Quality products from our family to yours. Ziyad Brothers Importing offers the finest quality products, including brands like Sultan, Kraft, Nestle, Hook, Rico Picon, Dana, and many more. Ask your retailer to carry these fine products because you deserve the very best. For more information, visit our website at www.ziyad.com. That's www.ziyad.com. Ziyad, quality products from our family to yours.
Thank you for listening to the Ray Hanania Radio Show, brought to you by the U.S. Arab Radio Network and sponsored by Arab News, the leading English language newspaper in the Middle East at ArabNews.com. This season, the Ray Hanania Radio Show focuses on the U.S. presidential elections, the battle between the major party candidates, former President Donald Trump and Vice President Kamala Harris, and the third-party contenders who could push the election into the House, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. and Dr. Jill Stein. We'll be back next Thursday with more special guests to help us understand the role Arab and Muslim voters in America are playing in the presidential election. Check out our page at arabnews.com/Ray Radio Show for all of the programs that we've recorded and all of the story links that have been written about the program. And also you can go to my website at Hanania.com, Hanania, Hanania.com, for my columns, my radio shows, my podcasts, and all my writing at Arab News. Have a great week, everybody. See you next Thursday. Good evening.